After calling for prayers for Arnold Schwarzenegger's Apprentice ratings, President Trump started off his Thursday by vowing to overturn a law restricting political speech by tax-exempt churches, a potentially significant victory for the religious right and a nod to his political base. He spent the rest of his day with a group of lawmakers talking tax and trade and took time to meet with Harley-Davidson executives. Still, while he worked to focus on domestic policy, the big story involved a country on the other side of the world. Major questions were raised over the United States' relationship with Australia. Amid reports, President Trump clashed with the Prime Minister during their call on Saturday. Thursday morning, Mr. Trump tweeted, "Do you believe it? The Obama administration agreed to take thousands of illegal immigrants from Australia. Why? I will study this dumb deal." Cameron Joseph is Washington bureau chief for the New York Daily News and joins us now from Washington. All right, Cameron, let's start with this. President Trump, who has made support for Israel a cornerstone of his foreign policy, shifted gears on Thursday in a statement. The White House warned the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the first time to hold off on new settlement construction. With Netanyahu coming in 2 weeks, how significant is this?
This is a big deal, and this is something that Netanyahu is not going to like. And I think, frankly, it is a big divergence from what President Trump said the entire campaign and most of his time as president-elect. And I think it's almost a Nixon to China moment in terms of somebody who was very hawkish on something, all of a sudden saying, hey, why don't we do it this way? At the same time, this is what the U.S. has said for decades. I mean, this is where George W. Bush was. This is where Barack Obama was, and took a lot of grief. Trump really beat up on him during the campaign for saying this. John Kerry made that really big kind of out-the-door speech saying how Israel needs to stop building the settlements because it's an impediment to peace. It's destroying any hope of the two-state solution. So this is kind of a weird return to exactly where the U.S. has been, but a dramatic swing from where Donald Trump
Do we
has
have
been.
any idea, Cameron, where that came from?
It's still unclear. I mean, it's basically just rolling out today. I think that it remains an open question who in the administration decided this, whether this was Donald Trump himself, whether he has different advisors in his ear than have been there before. Their nomination for ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, who's obviously not confirmed yet, is about the most hawkish person we've ever seen sent as ambassador to Israel, has been very closely aligned with right-wing Israeli parties and involved there. So I kind of feel like this probably wasn't him advocating that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. And Donald Trump has not been totally consistent all the time on all these policies. So it'll be interesting to see whether he sticks here, especially when he starts feeling pressure from the Jewish right in the U.S. and in Israel.
Yeah, a huge development on that front. All right, I want to turn to something you've written, Cameron, about. We are seeing some cleanup going on from Republican leaders over the U.S. relationship with Australia. What does the fact that Senator John McCain and Speaker Paul Ryan weighed in indicate about Republicans' level of concern?
I think certain Republicans are very, very nervous. And you see John McCain and Lindsey Graham talking a lot about this very publicly. They've obviously been critics of Trump from the start. McCain had to be pretty quiet during the campaign because he was also running for re-election. But he and Trump aren't exactly big fans of each other. But there's a lot of Republicans talking behind the scenes who are very concerned about a lot of these foreign policy moves. And the one I was hearing the biggest today about was this call between President Trump and the Prime Minister of Australia, where Trump basically chewed him out. He was unhappy about this deal that President Obama had agreed to take in refugees from Australia, many of them from these banned countries that Trump just said you're not allowed to come in from. He's basically cut him off. He said it was the worst call of the day to foreign leaders, and that included a call with President Putin. So there was a lot of tension, and a lot of Republicans were just wincing today. They were so upset that this had happened. John McCain actually called the ambassador, the Australian ambassador to the U.S. to basically reaffirm the relationship with them. They're one of our closest allies. And then we have the situation in Mexico, which is just getting worse and worse between President Nieto and President Trump. And Trump basically kind of hinted that he was ready to send in U.S. troops if Mexico couldn't get its act together to deal with their internal violence and the cartels. So there's a lot of tension with some of our very close allies. At the same time, we're being very nice to Russia, which, frankly, a lot of Republicans are very unhappy about. They spent 8 years yelling about how President Obama was too weak on Russia. Now Trump is so much further than Obama ever was. They made some adjustments to some of the sanctions today that turned out to be not that big a deal, but had people pretty alarmed at first. And so, people are very on edge on the Hill, and people are frankly on edge in a lot of capitals right now in terms of where Donald Trump is going to go.
Yeah, you mentioned Mexico. Where do things stand with the president of Mexico, President Peña Nieto? Because on Thursday, he was firm in saying that he would defend Mexican sovereignty during any kind of negotiation with the U.S. So where do things stand right now?
Nowhere good. Obviously, they had a canceled meeting. There's been some angry tweets. There have been some very tense phone calls between the two leaders. Nieto was supposed to come to the U.S., canceled that meeting. Trump then responded by having Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, go out and basically threaten a 20% tariff against all Mexican goods, which then they immediately had to walk back. They've both been kind of all over the place on this, and Nieto doesn't have very good approval ratings back at home. This is actually very helpful for him to have a big fight with Trump because he's very unpopular in Mexico for some obvious reasons. So I think this is something that could deteriorate further, and it's a big risk because Mexico, while we have some problems with, and obviously there's some border concerns, is a close ally, is one of the U.S.'s top trading partners, and so this could be problematic, and this could be problematic for years if things don't get better soon.
Also, Cameron, with the president's remarks on the Johnson Amendment, repealing the law would require approval by Congress. Could he, as he said he would, totally destroy it?
He could with Congress's help. And I think that's a big question. So basically, the Johnson Amendment bars churches from being explicitly political and keeps churches from spending money on politics. That's something that especially the religious right has really, really been unhappy with and for decades has tried to get rid of. At the same time, President Bush, wasn't exactly a big fan of it. The second President Bush, and it stayed in place. It's going to be really hard to break a Democratic filibuster to actually repeal the Johnson Amendment. And so I think this is one of those things that Donald Trump made a big campaign promise. He's promising it now. Those on the religious right definitely want to see it, but they're also pretty happy about his recent Supreme Court picks. So I think it remains to be seen whether this actually moves. There's a lot of big promises that President Trump is making right now, and the thing about Congress is it doesn't exactly move fast, and so we'll see how much of this can actually get done at the end of the day.
Finally, Cameron, we've seen Democrats accusing Republicans of breaking the rules, Republicans accusing Democrats of not doing their jobs, and now Betsy DeVos, the president's education secretary nominee, is facing opposition from her own party. How much of a toll is the constant clash over confirmations taking on the typically collegial Senate? Yeah,
I mean, I don't think it's been that collegial, honestly, for years. I think that this is a little bit of a shirts and skins issue where all of a sudden Republicans are in power and they're trying to do a bunch of things and Democrats are grinding it to a halt, whereas Republicans famously did this under President Obama with far fewer numbers in the Senate. And so I think that a lot of these things that people are getting all affronted about, honestly, they were ready to do the opposite a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And Democrats really shot themselves in the foot because they got so frustrated with Republican obstruction, they lowered the threshold to confirm cabinet nominees and lower court judges from 60 to 51. And now that's biting them pretty hard in the rear because they can't stop any of these people. So Betsy DeVos, is the education secretary, is the only one they really have a strong hope of blocking at this point. Two Republican senators have announced their opposition, which means right now it's 50-50. Mike Pence might be the first vice president in history to break a tie-breaking vote to get a cabinet nominee confirmed because of this new rule change. But if one more Republican flips, that means she actually will be stopped. And I know that a lot of Republicans today were telling me they're getting a ton of calls on this. Even some that have announced support for her seem a little bit nervous and hedging a little bit in terms of where they are. And so that vote is probably going to happen next Monday, it sounds like. And I think it's more likely than not that she gets confirmed. But some of these Republicans from swing states, especially ones where most people are in public schools, which she hasn't always been totally friendly to, are going to have a real tough vote, and we could either be seeing her go down or we could be seeing some campaign ads in 2 and 4 years.
A lot to watch. All right, Cameron Joseph in Washington for us. Cameron, thanks so much.